Howdy, and welcome to Risky Standard, an actual play podcast featuring a rowdy group of best friends telling compelling stories together using tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host and GM, Mitch Brewster. You can find the show over on Blue Sky at Risky Standard, and you can also always come find us in the show's Discord. There's a link to that in the show notes. We're chatting about the show in there. We're having a lively discussion right now about whether or not holiday cookies count as chips in our chip check channel.
Some of our institutions are under assault as we speak.
And we're, kind of teasing some of the stuff to come in season 2 and a little further down the line. With me today, I've got Pete Loftus.
Yo, what's up? I'm Pete. I still am not used to saying it. I'm on Blue Sky at chipenjoyer.bluesky.social. There's got to be a way to shorten that.
Yeah, how have they not? How have they not shortened it?
You can just say you're at.
Okay, it's Peter. No, wait, that's my name.
Like, no one ever said, I'm at twitter.com/
Yeah, it's twitter.com/profile/chip-enjoyer. That's where I'm at, but probably the best way to make fun of me would be in the Discord.
We've also got Malcolm Hall here tonight.
Hey, what's up? I'm on fucking Threads. That's where I've been posting.
Yeah, I'm like
good
also
Lord, the
doing
wasteland
that,
of Threads.
Jesus Christ.
Hey, if you love platforms, I got good news.
There's a ton of them. So you can find me on Threads. I've been posting some stuff on there. Also, I am helming the Risky Standard Instagram account.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
That's just Risky Standard. I've posted one little clip already. Get ready for more of your favorite moments from season 1. We're combing the archives, and I am learning how to make videos based on that.
We're really excited to have a social media intern this season.
Yeah.
He's doing really good.
I already do social media for my other job, so hey, I'm learning a lot this year. Growing as a 34-year-old man, learning social media is really great, and I'm excited to do it. I love you.
I love you too,
listener.
Oh.
No. Just a listener.
Speaking of that, also we by the time this is airing, for sure, also have the show live on YouTube now. So if for some reason you listen to podcasts on YouTube, which is apparently a segment,
honestly one of my favorite places to listen to podcasts.
Is that for real?
You and 95% of teenagers.
That's crazy.
Malcolm and all of his ages 14 to 18-year-old friends also all do that.
What I'll do is I'll put on YouTube and Spotify and then Apple playlists, and I'll also play some shorts of just kind of a medley of many episodes, and that's probably how we'd recommend it.
The melange.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a young Timothy Mansfield here tonight as well.
Great to be here. It's nice to, wrap up this year with all of you guys and know that every single Risky Standard listener, every risk taker, solidly on the nice list.
That's a guarantee.
Oh, this is actually going to be also probably our last recording together of 2024. I'm realizing, just looking at the clock and the calendar right now.
Wow, what a year!
Yeah, what a year it's been.
Personally, this year for me has been a living hell. But
we were just at PAX Unplugged last weekend. I don't know if we have any listeners who were there. If so, if you saw 3 guys being weird, that's us. But we had a blast. We found a lot of really cool stuff. A lot of really fun ideas for games. We're excited to work into upcoming seasons and other one-shots. So keep an eye on the Discord. We'll keep any updates posting there.
And I'm not really sure where this is going to fall in our release schedule, but we are recording this episode having just finished our first season, and you can expect we are going to be playing a couple of sort of Risky Standard side stories, some standalone games that are going to kind of tide us over until we launch into season 2, which is going to be coming down the pipe next year, early in the year. And that's going to be us playing The Wild Sea by Felix Isaacs, which is a kind of weird fantasy TTRPG about explorers sailing across a verdant treetop sea. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But today we are looking backwards a little bit. Today's session is going to be pretty different from what we normally do here. We're not going to be playing any games today. Instead, today's episode is going to be a little bit of a reflection on Season 1, the story that we told there. And we are going to ask each other some questions and answer some fan-submitted questions about the season, about the show in general, as we think a little introspectively about, what we accomplished together, the work that we did, the story that we told. A big inspiration for this kind of episode, for me especially, is friends at the table. Who regularly do this kind of post-mortem at the end of a season. The Adventure Zone also does this sort of thing with the Adventure Zone. But I personally, in general, have always been really interested in people breaking down the creative process behind something. And I'm really curious to see what you boys have to say about what we did this season and the show that we made. As we think about it and start thinking about what we want to do with the upcoming season.
Yeah, that's a great question. And if it were me, I guess I would immediately want to put a 5-star review, probably on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, just to kind of reflect how I felt about it.
But yeah, so today, like I said, we're gonna be answering some questions. It's gonna be a little looser, gonna be a little more casual than a normal episode. This is some real how does the sausage get made kind of stuff. I'm out here with a Tropicalia IPA from Creature Comforts Brewing.
Ooh,
down in Georgia.
Busting out a little IPA for this.
Yeah. So, we're in a casual mode tonight.
Wait, are me and Mitch the only people drinking tonight?
No, I'm drinking.
No, I don't want to say what I'm drinking, but...
Are you drinking White Claw, Pete? Is that a White Claw?
The bodega has a bunch of Lucy's, so I'm having a peach White Claw. Sounds gross, but I was thinking about Tim's big reveal last week that the upcoming Busch Light peach flavor is hitting the market very soon.
I'm just having a Modelo. Just it's Modelo time. Just a regular old Modelo.
And it looks tiny in your gargantuan hand.
It does look like
a thimble.
I'm a large man, okay?
When my mom came to town a couple weeks ago, she left me and my partner Bree multiple bottles of Deep Eddy Lemon.
What is that?
Mini airplane bottles of vodka.
Yeah.
And so we had bought a mixer for that, and I have a bunch of squirt left over. So I have a Deep Eddy Ruby Red vodka that I am.
Mixology alert.
Wait, Tim, so it might be worth saying your mother is still a flight attendant, correct?
Flight attendant, correct.
So do you think that she stole these from work?
Liberated.
She took them as gifts to give to loyal customers.
Hell yeah.
And her most loyal children.
Shout out to a lovely woman.
Yeah.
Hit us with that home address.
Yeah. I will say the biggest thing I've learned from her since working here, working for the airlines, is if you want a free drink, just act like you're really scared of flying, and they would love to give you a drink. If they can calm you down and you aren't making a scene but look very scared, can we get you anything? And your answer should always be yes.
And that's my secret. I always look kind of frightened. Well, do we want to get started on some of these questions?
Yeah,
let's do it. I feel like we're warmed up.
Yeah, we're loosey. We're goosey.
I'm reflective as hell. I'm peeking in my self-reflection.
So why don't we start off here? Mongoose Loose over in the Discord sent us a couple of questions.
Shout out Mongoose Loose.
They ask us, what originally made us gravitate towards Beam Saber? Was it a group thing or one's love of Gundam and big robots that led us to the pilot's seat?
Well, I can tell you it was certainly two members' love of Gundam and giant robots.
Would you want to guess who those two might
be? I know it wasn't me. Tim, was it you?
Oh, my favorite thing being robots? Oh, no, that wasn't me. It's very funny that you asked this question because I remember this was the first trip we went on, met up with the boys after COVID, and we were sitting out at this open bar in Austin
We were at the Yellow Jacket social
Yellow
club.
Jacket at a bench, and Mitch and Pete had been talking about how this was the game to play, and I was like, I don't whatever. I don't love giant robots, not my thing. I like fantasy, and I was like, what happens if I just want to be a farmer? Which is like, exactly. But what does a farmer do? And what kind of tools would a farmer who now has to be involved in this forever war because it's not his choice in this world? I'm maybe not even giving him the full credit, but he really sold it.
Yeah, because it was way longer than that. We talked for probably 45 minutes at you.
Yeah, what does that mean for someone like that in this world, caught up in this forever world? What is the story you want to tell? Because you as a player can tell that. As a GM, I want to be able to facilitate that in this world. And Mitch was really good at making me go like, oh, I thought I was being real like a whippersnapper with that like trick question, but Mitch had a very good answer and like made me feel very excited about how to approach it differently as a guy who's like, instinct is not big robots. It's more, wizards, bows, and arrows, you know? So
I also want to add that the inspiration for Desmond and all Chiropterans actually came from that Austin trip. We were underneath the bridge.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And I was like, what if I was like a little bat guy? And Mitch was like,
great.
That's great. It's a great idea. And then that became like a huge, and then we like went deeper and deeper into like, what would that look like? And then we came up with like the whole, there was an empire. There was like the Chiropteran Empire, and they controlled most of the galaxy, and they've since fallen. And, we built on that from there. But that also came from that boys trip, that lads holiday we went on.
Yeah. And, I think back to like Tim's point, I wouldn't really say like, I'm not a categorical anime guy, and I'm not like deep into Gundam. Like I was into like Gundam Wing in like high school when it was on Toonami. There was like a couple golden years where Toonami ripped pretty much like from the time I got home from school till dinner, and like Gundam Wing was on that, which was kind of probably the first time I ever really got introduced to that genre, but I didn't really like grasp it. But I think one thing that I was kind of drawn to was also through getting like this from Mitch, I think, was like what it is about this genre is more than kind of just big robot stuff. I think there's like something in there about like, scale a little bit. Like, what does it mean to be like a small person caught up in like a huge thing, personified, of course, by like an like unstoppable killing machine. But my biggest touch point, I think, is Gundam, but not the super popular ones, which was like Mitch showed me it too, was like 08th MS Team, which is like an extremely grounded, kind of more like a Romeo and Juliet level story. There's just like also a war with huge war machines going on. And I think that was like the first one where I was like, oh, these are like an analog for bodies under duress, I guess. Or like, what does conflict do kind of externally and internally? And I don't know, like it had always been kicking around in my head, I think because of that sense of it being like the high fantastic, but also like really grounded in this sort of could happen to anybody way.
Yeah, I will definitely admit to being guilty of probably being the most big robots guy on the podcast out of everyone. I remember also it being in middle school, Toonami airing the original Mobile Suit Gundam run, and that being just like deeply pivotal to my core identity as like a teenager. It was instantly in love with Gundam, with like this sort of soap opera playing out on the battlefield, and these like avatars of war that people were piloting against each other.
Do you remember when we lived together? I had like an old PlayStation 2.
Oh yeah.
We got a copy of some game that I had never heard of that you were talking about called Zeonic Front.
I love Zeonic Front. It's such a good Gundam game.
I've never played a video game like that before, where it was like, I don't know if you're familiar, listener at home, with like the...
I have never heard of it personally.
I also have no idea.
I remember Zone of the Enders. Zone
of the Enders, I kind of remember. I never played that. But Zeonic Front was like, you had a squad of shitty Zakus, which were like the mass-produced like grunt suit, and you were trying to complete some operation. But like when the Gundam appeared, like Gundams are like basically this white devil. They call it a white devil in the show because it's like it just kills everything in front of it. So it was like, I never thought about what this thing looked like. And yeah, I think even like modern Gundam is just really flashy and like very ballet in the sky kind of thing. But like the idea of this being like, it's like a tank movie essentially. It's like Fury. It's a really good mech movie with Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf. Like I always think about that as like, you're stuck in this little thing and like you could die horribly like at any given moment. So it's like it really escalates a lot of that like drama.
And for me, I shout this out as a big influence on the show constantly, and I'll say it again here. Friends at the Table, another, in my opinion, maybe like the best actual play podcast out in the world is.
No doubt about that, in my opinion.
Yeah, they have done several seasons around the idea of mechs, and especially the host of that show, Austin Walker, has done a lot of writing around the mech genre. And like listening to that when I was younger was also like kind of like a big. Maybe rethink critically like a lot of what mech stories are about. And then on the other side of this is Beam Saber, right? Specifically Beam Saber, which I have been following in development since like early versions of this game. Back when it had a completely different, there was a point where the vehicle playbooks that you used didn't have quirks. They had their own stress meter, which was fuel, which worked the same way as like a stress gauge was, which is kind of it had a very completely different like action economy. So I've watched Beam Saber grow into the full game it is from like kind of like the rough prototypes, following along as Austin has been working on it. And I love Forge in the Dark games. They are some of my favorite role playing games. As a system, Blades in the Dark felt like a explosion of originality and creativity in like the kind of narrative game space when it came out to me.
And I think the listener at home probably doesn't know this, but like we had this whole project kind of came to be from COVID, and like Mitch and Tim and Malcolm and I have been friends for, I don't even know, 15 years probably. Yeah. And like we'd always played role-playing games, but we never really played like a, preset adventure, like a 5e kind of book, like, whatever, any of those. But we always kind of like took a system and told our story. And then we kind of started doing this in COVID when we were all, in our respective pods, and we're in all different cities. And that was my first time touching a Forged in the Dark game when we played a season of like Scum and Villainy. And I think that really unlocked something in my brain that was like, this system really allows for like a mechanic that advances tension and fiction and like leads to these outcomes where the variable may like really throw a wrench in the plan. And it really lends like depth. I mean, I think there are a bunch of moments throughout this season where things just didn't go right, or went right when we kind of hoped they wouldn't, or like, the finale is a great example of that too, where it was just like using the actual dice roll as a thing that's like the lever that you pull to, I think advance like a story beat or really change one of those character threads is like what really makes the system work for me. And I think like Beam Saber was like a natural evolution from Scum and Villainy, which we're back to also, if you're listening. The Division of Silent Accords, we're playing Scum and Villainy again.
Yeah. And this is, I feel like we're, now we've got the season under our belts, like I think we've hinted at this like before, but like, the secret lore of the show, right, is that this Scum and Villainy campaign kind of was like the proto form of the setting that this Beam Saber campaign took
someday
place in.
we should do one of these and just like lay out, because technically season 1 of Risky Standard is like a dotted line from that first season's narrative.
Should we spill like the beans on
spill the beams?
Yeah, lay out at least the basic points, right? Which is like, none of this stuff is canon because it's a game that we play privately.
Yes,
you can't know.
Yeah,
unless you're on the highest tier of Patreon, which I think right now we're looking at
$100,000 a year.
Yeah, it's about 100.
And we'll recreate.
We will replay the game for you. Yeah.
But we played a campaign of Scum and Villainy in a kind of like a setting that I threw together pretty loosely, riffing with the boys in conjunction with everyone's ideas. But that setting established the kind of like formation of this idea of this thing that would become the Concordat, this kind of like religious theocracy. And it had a bunch, it was a fun season because you guys started as criminals and you promised me you weren't going to be rebels. And you ended the season by...
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, we were like, we're not going to be insurrectionary this time. We're like going to be true believers.
Our characters and that story like took on such a life of its own that like we got so swept away in it, and it became like, at least to me, extremely real. And like,
oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
It was like the story was we were just like reciting it like through memory or something.
Yeah.
You know, like it became something so much bigger than it was ever intended to be. It was just supposed to be a way to like blow off steam and forget the fact that like the world was ending briefly. You know,
and I have like 7 to 8 beers. You know?
Yeah.
So you kind of bring this to a full loop. That sort of proto season, that campaign ended with this kind of group of ad hoc rebels and revolutionaries and pirates kind of escaping into deep space. And when it came time to start talking about doing a show, you know, we all felt so in love with some of the storytelling we had done there that we wanted to see if we could use that as like the skeleton for a setting. And so the question for me was like, okay, how do we follow up on that? And it was kind of like, well, you know, what's interesting is like, what if that like kind of escaped group becomes like an actual force, like a real revolutionary force? And that's kind of like the proto idea that eventually turns into like the Ring. You know, then the Commonwealth and this idea of like, you know, these kind of like capitalists who are, you know, somewhere a different kind of antagonist than these kind of like maniacal religious zealots kind of comes in. And you know, as I was thinking about like what's a game, you know, Beam Saber, which I had been following for so long, was kind of like just nearing its like kind of completed stages, right when it was about time we were going to start playing this game for the recording for the show. And it felt like such a, you know, what we were already ready with Forge in the Dark games felt like thematically like a continuation of the things that we'd already done before. And I think it was great. You know, I loved playing Beam Saber this season. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. You know, I know like it was a challenge at times for you guys to kind of inhabit the genre space that I think you're maybe a little less comfortable with, but I think some of you guys, all of you guys, really found it this season in a way that was really delightful.
I also want to say that like I started out this season being a giant robot skeptic, you know, but as I like got some more time in the pilot seat, I'm like, this like actually is very fun. It rips.
It is cool.
Be able to do this and like sort of inhabit not like 2 characters, maybe like 1.5 characters. It's like you and your armor. Yeah.
Certainly, like over the course of the season, the redshift felt bigger than Rhodes like several times over. At a point, I really like was almost sort of intimidated by like the concept. Felt like it grew bigger than the character, and in like some of these ways, you know, like they represent like different things to different characters. But yeah, it's really that's like the magic of this stuff is, you know, it's like our imagined little world, but they become so real. Like you feel like you can really put your hands around it.
Yeah, I think that's like a pretty good answer to that question.
Pretty
right?
15-20 minute answer to that question.
We want to kind of move along? Just maybe have a different thread here.
I'll also shout out Mongoose. Had another kind of question here around, gosh, I don't know, maybe it's like episode 13 at the Diadem Royale. We're playing a kind of game within a game, which is one of my favorite like little elements to throw out in a season, where we played Foray, which was a kind of like holographic chess simulation of different mech pilots, kind of simulating like a 5-way battle royale. Mongoose asked if we'd ever thought about turning Foray into a board game. Answer on that one, no, but I really like that idea. So like as soon as we got it, I was like, oh shit, that's really good. And so I started working a little bit on a little kind of miniaturized version of that, but great suggestion. So we'll let you know if maybe we'll get that into something in a future date.
Make sure you boys all have your miniatures painted.
I got a few. At one point I was working on like in Unity, a kind of like turn-based like tactics game that was kind of moving in the direction of a Foray style kind of like mech tactics board game thing.
Very fun idea. I'll throw out a question next, if that's cool. Does anybody have anything else? I'm going to put one to Mitch here, and something I've been kind of curious about, which was like, you know, essentially, what was the story that you wanted to tell at the beginning of this season, and did it change like over the course of it? Because I know we spent a lot of time ideating, and we kind of hit the ground running and just kind of fell into action. But like, how did the story change for you?
So, you know, I think my conception of the season went through a lot of different changes, and it also really kind of shifted as you three came up with your characters.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, in the first kind of like conception of the season, I had kind of imagined that this would be a story about a little bit more directly about people from, this sort of egalitarian revolutionary faction, the Ring, kind of fighting this war on Imber. It was like maybe a little bit more of a war story in my head. And I think one thing that, kind of changed as we got the characters is that I realized we had 3 characters who were all kind of had complicated relationships to the Ring, at best, right? When we start, Desmond and Carta are both kind of working with the faction as a means to their own end. They're both pursuing their own kind of drives, their own goals that don't have anything to do with the mission of the Ring. And then we have Rhodes, who is, ostensibly a sort of hero of the Ring, but who has fled it. And so that, I think, is something that ended up making me realize that this wasn't quite the war story that I thought it was anymore. And I think it kind of took us a little bit more in a direction of the tropes of a spy story. I started thinking, a big thought in my mind in this season, actually, at the beginning of it was Suicide Squad. The 80s DC comic. It's had a couple movies made out of it, right? But about these kind of experts who are doing a mission that they are kind of conscripted to do. And that wasn't quite the case here. Each of these characters, I think, had a choice to not do this work. But I ended up casting, I think, Troubadour as a little bit more of an antagonist figure especially in the first half of the season than I had originally envisioned them as.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I think from my perspective anyway, one thing that I thought about throughout the whole season was that in some way I feel like that sort of taciturn relationship with the Ring is sort of reflective of just the era we lived through. While we were recording this, it's in kind of the last gasps of neoliberalism, where it feels like the radical left is kind of an ever changing and kind of fragile or unstable thing, but it's the best thing that we have is still kind of trying for this goal, despite a lot of trials and tribulations. And I feel like that reflected a little bit in my coloring there, and in my own life, I feel like I've spent a lot of time, hoping and working for these causes, both professionally and personally. And there's that sense of you believe in it and you want it really bad, and it's just it's not getting closer, right? But what I think I took away from over the course of this was, we said a lot. I mean, Malcolm says it all the time, but it's become in my vocabulary a lot. Is there's no way out but through, right? And this is kind of the reality of the Ring, especially under siege. Was where else are you going? The war is going to follow you anywhere. There's no corner that's kind of free of this. But that was an interesting reflection for me, because I think I went into the season really wanting to capture this idea of I'm a defender and believer. But I think we all kind of brought our own backgrounds to that in kind of different ways.
I think that there was a moment too where I wasn't even thinking about Troubadour as somebody who I shouldn't trust or whatever. But there was a moment where Rhodes, said to Des, you need to watch out. I think that Des was initially really creeped out by Seldom Row, and the whole apparatus thing was very spooky to him. And then having Rhodes take him aside and be you shouldn't trust every single thing that this person says, or their intentions might not be completely aligned with you and your liberation. And that was something that me as a player did not even really think about until you said it when we were playing, and I was what?
Yeah, and I sometimes felt bad about that, but I guess part of that was the scatter mask was, to me, I was at no point I kind of expected that Cameo was going to be a double agent, right? Or because the Ring was operating in Coronatus, basically under secrecy, right? It was we didn't operate really in collaboration with any other cells until we met up with a couple of the the Golden or the Open Palm group and Gates Technic and stuff. And so I was kind of thinking for a moment that maybe we had been played, because we just kept getting set up where things went bad. And it was what is going on here? Are we just being walked into the mouth of the tiger? And that was fun tension for me anyway, as a player.
I guess that's funny. I never really thought of Troubadour as someone to be wary of. And anytime we walked into something where we were caught either unprepared, or even if it was just a dice roll brought us into something that we weren't quite able to handle, I just went, Right. That is what happens a lot when a smaller organization goes against a way bigger.
Yeah, like you're completely outgunned, you're completely out-resourced.
Yeah, that it just that both as a player and as a character, I think that it was a difference that maybe we had as playing that. Like especially Rhodes being there so long, like a historical member of the Ring, and Carta, who is the youngest of the group, kind of seeing their first foray, maybe there's a better word, but into interacting with a group of like this, and that, well, no, this is a group that I believe in. Why would there be someone who doesn't have all this linked in for us?
Well, and I don't know if this is a good kind of moment. Like, I do kind of want to zoom in on Carta a little bit. I don't know if anybody else has anything on that.
I want to add one more thing. I think that it is kind of telling that as soon as, Troubadour Cameo got what she wanted from us, she kind of disappeared,
Yeah. I mean, so did Seldom Row.
Up until like the end there. But like as soon as she got what she wanted, we were pretty much on our own. Those last couple of missions were run on our lonesome or with, Rebus. But
yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, Cameo is like a big reveal. I'm curious if we'll ever see them again. And if not,
I'm sure we will.
Seneschal was also a fun little bit too. But I think zooming on Carta a little bit, Timmy brought up a really good point, which, to me anyway, was like, I think Carta was probably like the only character in the group that really, I think, had like a full character arc, right? Like over the course of the season, I feel like Carta was, young, headstrong, like mostly a gun pointed in the right direction. And like, you were kind of just an angry character upset about the death of his parents when we started. But by the end of it, Carta had really like grown and developed into kind of putting a period at the end of those sentences, right? And like was not only kind of closing the loop on the parent vengeance arc thing, but like had also moved into being more of like a mentor and a trainer. Like, do you, especially like, actually getting to the point of killing like Wager Felbar?
Right.
I'm really curious on your perspective. Like, did you expect it to happen? And like, what was it like when you turned that corner?
Yeah. I mean, to answer first, I do think that Carta and even me as a player to an extent was like, that is going to happen.
Yeah.
Even if I, have a bomb strapped to me and I grab him across the waist and we jump into that hole and the bomb goes off and we're both gone. Like that was going to happen in my mind. And I think in Carta's, but I think that it didn't end there. And seeing the loss that came along with this season of people that he knew, and the more we focused on the people who made up the Ring, and learning that there are, within systems like the Commonwealth and the Concordat, hundreds of people like him, and that being put so much more in front of him, that like that can't be the solution for everyone if it really needs to get better. And I think he feels like he let a couple people die in ways that they didn't have to.
Abruptly too.
Yes, and in that realizing
Born
like
Selector, one of our shortest-lived fan favorites,
Quinn Selector.
Oh, yeah. Quinn Selector, yeah.
With Quinn Selector dying, like that. I think that there was a point where he's like, "Oh, that can't be forever." I can't, and because it was about to be the onslaught, like that leads up to the season finale. That like, what does that future look like now that some of my like own problems are about to come to like maybe an end? And I think that he kind of just had I guess, for lack of a better word, grow up very quick and recontextualize what the Ring actually means to him and what it does in his life and for those of others. And I think about this a lot with being a young male. Being a 25-year-old male is maybe one of the worst things you can be in the world. I just like with attitude and how things should work. And like, I think that the Ring and the people he met in it and the people he worked with and those who have like set up and given him like real guidance allowed him to move beyond that. Sorry, I am now getting very caught up in like the bigger arcing ideas of what Carta was. But if that answers any of that.
No, I mean, I think like for me, one of my favorite points or like notable moments in the season was when Rhodes kind of had a freak out and was like out in the desert, and Carta and Dez went back to Coronatus, and Rhodes was gone for like, I don't know, 6-8 weeks, and coming back, like both your characters had really, I think, like blossomed in a way that I think was really nice, where like both of you kind of stepped up, and I liked that when Rhodes came back, like no one was waiting for him, which I think was something like I throughout the season like was weighing that I felt like the character got kind of big, or the redshift became kind of like a bigger thing than I originally planned, and I really loved that the kind of like human level of the story like continued with the cogs, the coalition against Grenfield. But yeah, I thought that was really good. It was cool to watch too. And I think now is a good time also. Like I'm going to turn it over to you, Malcolm, too, because Desmond also changed a lot over the course of the season, right? Like I think in the beginning we butt heads a bit, but we always kind of butt heads in games, which like I think is fun. But like Des came across like very black-pilled, very like disenchanted, and to be fair, had spent the last, I don't know, 5 years like breaking rocks and like being like a hired mercenary, or not even hired, a conscripted mercenary. But I think by the end of it,
I was never a conscripted mercenary. I was operating heavy like mining machinery.
Oh, right. I thought you were kind of forced into servitude by the Belfry boys, but they fucked you over and you ended up in jail.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you know, I think by the end of it, I felt like Desmond was more of a believer than my character was.
Well, I think what came about that, I think COG was like a really influential, pivotal moment for Desmond. And I think that just being in Black Star over time, I think that obviously the Belfry boys was kind of the only family he had ever known. You know, he does have a family. Obviously, he has a sister. He has parents. We have not really gotten into where they are or what they're doing or what happened to them. Maybe we will in season 3. But I think came from rough circumstances. He was playing the cards that he was dealt. Thea obviously played those cards a little differently and used that strife to like build herself up in a different way. And Des defaulted on cruelty. And I think that obviously the Belfry boys were shitty fucking friends. He didn't really like know at that point. It was the only family he'd ever known, so he trusted them. And I think that going through, and like you were talking about coming back and like seeing Desmond and Carta having built something from scratch.
Yeah.
That was also a pivotal moment for Desmond too, where he was like, you know what? I need to put my own shit aside and I need to help out my friend. And also, you know, finding like leadership and what that is. Whereas, you know, I think you wanted me to take point in one mission to be a leader, and like me as like a player, I'm like, I hated that, and it was really hard. And didn't know what to do. But then like having gone through the sort of COG arc and learning what it means to like really be a comrade to someone, that really helped. And I think it really changed his view of like what the ring could actually be. It's not just it for him initially it was just a means to an end, but I think that it's becoming like he's starting to understand the principles and take them to heart now.
Oh, I love that. Like I think there's something, because one of the I think the second, whenever I filled my bond clock with, or my pilot clock with Desmond, I had to rewrite a different belief. And one thing that occurred to me like halfway through this season was that when we started, I think Desmond was really like, you know, had felt like he had lost like a squad. And what I realized was that Desmond had lost his family, and like that it was much more about the loss of this like relationship that I feel like bookended really nicely with how Desmond like stepped into the role with this like young group of idealists that kind of mirrors Butte Halloran like in a nice way. And you know, just saying it right here, Butte Halloran, banger character.
Yeah, R.I.P.
Was great.
R.I.P.
Almost wish we got more time with them. But you know, that was like,
there's still so many more Belfry boys we haven't really even touched on.
And
you know?
I mean, listener, if you've heard the finale, I was like on the edge of my seat with the one-eyed bat like showing up. That was so sick. Where I was like, we finished the season too early. Like I just want to know more about that guy. So I'm very excited about that.
Also, listener, if you're listening to this and you have not listened to the finale,
turn it off.
That's a wild choice.
Sorry, I didn't mean to call you a dumbass, but you're acting kind of like a dumbass if you haven't listened to season 1.
You know, it was really interesting for me because, and I don't know, maybe you two can speak to this a little bit, but like, there's like something interesting going on for me, which is that like Carta and Desmond both have revenge stories this season.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like a task I felt like I had, or that I was like working on in collaboration with you guys, was figuring out how to tell both of these revenge stories in a way that like doesn't feel like we are playing the same notes, but also feels kind of true to those characters' journeys. And I do think they mirror each other in interesting ways. There's like losses of families, but they look different. And there's also, they both come to a kind of closure through violence, right? Carta and Des both, to some extent get closure, right? They both get...
Well, I think that Dez's closure is a little bit sour. And I think that he, we're going to keep exploring that. But I think that he thought that he would get closure through violence, but is maybe finding that, hey, maybe the best revenge is a life well lived.
I don't know.
Or maybe there'll be violence. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's our first, I think it was like our first kind of big story beat arc that concluded with Desmond killing Halloran. Like at the time, I was dead set on trying to recruit, because it was like we don't have any allies, right? Like we were so early on here where it was like, that's an asset, not an enemy. Maybe we can change something. And it was like at the moment I think that you were just like, I just pulled the trigger, like done, right? Mm-hmm. And where I remember leaving that episode and being like, shit, like this, the emotional like weight of this story like turned from kind of like, I don't know, something we were still baking into like a very
real cake.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was cool. And yeah, I think you're right though. Like there is still a lot more in that story, but what's interesting to me is that I kind of don't feel like it's a revenge story in the same way anymore. Like it is, and it changed, right? Like, and yeah.
I also think that there is a killing Butte fulfills a revenge fantasy in a very different way than Killing Wager does for Carta in regards to the way other people are seeing it, maybe. Because when, Butte is done, that does answer like a question, will I be able to do it, that Des had? Like, will he answer for the things he's done against me? And I think that maybe Carta, by the time the season got to it and he actually did it, that at this point it was maybe he got to the point where it was like, this isn't just for me. It is to show the people around me that like some of these people above you can be taken out, but if we are here and are trained, we can take care of these people before it needs to be just a story of tragedy for me. That we can train to learn to fight all of these things that are the things that hit us at the source of our problems, that, and in training with cogs and everything, that you can band together and have, a connection that allows you to fight against these before they become forces that take things away from you so directly.
And I think credit to Mitch again too, like with Wager Felbar, I liked that Carta, like this moment had finally come after 40 odd episodes, and like kind of getting face to face with the big bad. He's like, I don't even know your name, It was like, well, you're gonna know my name, like, and I think that was like a cool moment, because you're right, like it wasn't as personal in the way that it was for Desmond, or like that's not even true though, right? Like
it's more personal.
Yeah, but it felt more symbolic.
The way I tried to think about it in my head as I was trying to frame these a lot during the season was thinking about what had happened to Carta as like the side effect of like a system and a process, as opposed to like a very personal betrayal for Desmond that then put him into a system and a process.
Yes. Totally. I feel that. And I think that you did that well. Again, not hitting those same notes. Just 2 times every episode, we started to talk about what we were trying to do. So it allowed those to go off in different directions, where hopefully the listener got to see 2 different, at least parts of that world too.
Yeah,
different characters and types of characters and scenery and points of execution for different actions. So.
Okay, let me put one back to Mitch here. So, so Mitch, question to you. I think like one thing that I always like in any tabletop game, in anything we've played or other games, is like a moment where, the players kind of put their heads together and can like stump the GM sort of, or like make a decision that kind of changes the course of an episode or an arc kind of in like a matter of seconds. And you always say it where it's like, okay, well, there's like all my planning out the window. Like, were there any moments that in this season where we really left you kind of like, we did the thing you didn't expect?
That's a good one. There's a couple that like jump to mind. Yeah, it's a small one, but it really just like it gave me a big hoot and a laugh. Was the Triop Stampede in the Voice in the Dust arc.
Yeah, that's true.
I really had not thought of that as like a...
We had like probably spent 30 minutes kind of baking like an assault plan, and then as soon as we got off and like signed off on the episode, I was like, oh no, wait, like I got it. And then we texted, and then it was like, yeah, I know we just talked about how we have this like whole complicated like assault thing, but what we're actually gonna do is just like run a stampede of bugs through town.
So that that was like a fun one where I was like, all right, because I originally I think I had envisioned that whole mission being way more of kind of like a Metal Gear Solid-esque stealth sequence.
That's what I was doing.
Which is what Desmond still did. Yeah. Desmond still had that mission. But Desmond was kind of doing the mission that I had originally planned for 3 people. While Rhodes
is why I failed.
True.
So I guess that one was a little bit of a surprise for sure. I was not expecting Rhodes kind of fucking off into the desert to find Abel Selkirk, like kind of without anyone else, just like abandoning the Redshift. I had known, Abel Selkirk as an NPC was something I had seeded early on in some conversations, and I kind of knew I wanted to get this perspective of kind of like a fundamental mystic who is not the Concordat, but who is like tied into some of the mysteries of what's going on in Imber. Like that guy was always probably going to show up in some way. But having to kind of suddenly break an episode and figure out what it looked like to run an episode where Rhodes was just in a totally different place for what ended up being like, months of like a month or so of narrative. That was like one that really threw me for a loop, but then also ended up being some of like the most interesting stuff for me. Like we said before, the way Tim and Malcolm took the COG stuff and kind of like ran with like, what does it look like when these two are the Black Star constellation? Like, I didn't have any of that in my notes. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, I think, but also, Rhodes is the, de facto leader of Black Star in the same way that Pete Loftus is the de facto leader of the Rowdy Boys.
I don't feel that way at all. But
listener, you can laugh along with us when you say that.
Well, in truth, like, I think that I don't even know if we've talked about it, but I tried to get Mitch to let Rhodes die so many times where I'm like, I think I got it, and I think Rhodes dies here, and you're like, no, man, like we're not gonna kind of just like do this. And I was like, okay, fine. I thought about Rhodes just like leaving and maybe not coming back to the season, but like the thing that I realized was that everything that like Rhodes tried to bury was coming back. Like the war had followed him here after he had kind of found some kind of peace. And then not only that, but like this kind of demon from his past that I think Rhodes really sort of maybe thought had finally put some closure to. And I mean, like Mitch and I really dive into Rhodes and Hyacinth's backstory in the 2-part Last Shooting game.
Which is great. I loved it.
Which, I think that came together really well. And something kind of, like rhyming about that was like one of the big touch points for where we came into Beam Saber. It certainly influenced a lot of my thinking. Was like a one-off game Mitch and I played when I had COVID and like, I don't even know, 2019 maybe. We played Last Shooting and I was like, like this feels interesting. But, I thought that like at that time, like Rhodes was freaking out, like, because it was like, this is the one thing we didn't want to happen. And I thought a lot about not coming back to the suit at all, basically until I didn't even really realize that I left the suit behind until I think Tim and Malcolm at the end of the episode were like, wait, like, do we have to take it
out
back?
of the sand?
Yeah.
Like, what?
And I was like, oh shit, like I did just leave like a nuclear bomb, like unsupervised, in like a valley. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. And like I'll fully cop that I don't think I had a plan really. I was just like kind of felt like my back was up against a wall. And I think I just kind of tapped into the character, feeling like there are times in my life where I've kind of bugged out like that. Like the weight of responsibility is too great, right? Like, and you shy away from opportunity because it feels impactful to like follow it. And like ultimately that's where the story led. What about you guys? Like, did you have any other favorite moments of the season or like any kind of stuff that really stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I will also answer that question just as a like history of doing theater and visuals set design. I think that we hit something really cool when we were in the valley that the train was coming through. What is that?
Blossom Canyon.
Blossom Canyon.
I love the glowing moss and how we could track movement through the valley.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
Cool. Also just, again, is why 4A should become a board game.
Yeah, 4A was really fun.
I just loved hearing about that. I'm a sucker for like a landscape that has every piece to it. It's like that like kids book where it's like Innsmouth, like marsh, mountains, valley.
Oh, the water cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, where it just shows you all the different places.
All the different biomes. Yeah.
It's like, oh, damn, where would I want to live? I love playing a game in a realm like that. And I think that was just a cool image to see. I mean, all the lily pad lounge stuff was really great to me.
The Diadem Royale was a definite high note for me too, but also because I love like a costume subterfuge sequence.
Oh yeah, I'm where I get to put on a different voice and put out some jawed furs and pretend to be a different person is always
the
very
Sedge
fun.
Sentinel. What were your names?
Gall Teller.
Oh, Gall Teller and
Siegfried Spendlove.
Siegfried Spendlove.
I was also going to shout that out as one of my favorite moments of the season. And it was a real treat. As soon as we got to the point where I realized it could be like disguises, like that was
disguises, and also going to the red carpet, and you can hear the flash bulbs going off, and there's big band music playing.
I knew kind of from the start of the season there were a few like beats I wanted to hit at one point or another during the season, and for sure one of them was like a big kind of party scene, and that is kind of what the Lost Crown ended up turning into, was that like a big gathering of people for something was like a thing I knew I wanted to see these sort of rough and tumble spies in a like fancy dress setting, and I loved how it came out. That was one of my favorite arcs in the first half of the season.
I mean, I think probably anybody listening here would agree that like, I think Rebus Actual was like, by and large a fan favorite. One of my favorite NPCs. I think had a lot of color, was very funny. Was like a little touch of the high fantastic in there, very theatric, which was really great.
When he invites you up to like his rooftop, like palatial,
all this open water in a desert.
I think that was really like beautiful and made you feel like, or at least made me feel like I was walking on a knife's edge of like, this is a threat and this is an opportunity. That was so fun to listen to as a player, at least. And I hope for everyone else listening, but where I was just like, is Rhodes going to leave here in parts because Rebus is upset with him? Or is Rebus about to like open his like floodgates and allow all the like connections he has to us to allow us to do the things that we are hoping he would let us?
In my recollection of it was like when we walked in and the butler was synthetic and was like all filigreed and like matched the furniture. I was like, oh, fuck this guy. Like, I was like, no way is Rhodes cool with this. And I thought that was like a fun choice because the robot butler guy or the synthetic butler was like cool with it. Was like, hey man, like don't fuck this up. Like I'm pretty good here, which was like a fun, I think, and these are all the kinds of things that makes this setting and really is a testament to Mitchell's like storytelling, is what makes it feel lived in without being this like constant egregious, like, we're not reading out of like Mao's little red book. Like, I think part of it was that every ideology is flawed. And like, and even in the idea of belief in this driving philosophical goal, like you see the fractures of like class and politics and comfort, really. Like we had a lot of characters, I think, who were kind of following, like, I think that's one of the big themes in this season was like, what does it look like to have like the seduction of like empire, but also a lot of it was just like corporate autocracy, right? Like it was just like, this is just kind of a place where you can make a okay living. And like most of the big stuff going on in the core doesn't bother you out here, like that's kind of where base evil takes root.
I think that we're also missing the best part of the Diadem Royale mission, which was the introduction of Hyacinth Gorin. like didn't see that coming. And then when it happened, it was just like, oh, here's a complete ripple in reality. Like, this is a thing that exists now, and we all have to deal with it. That this person just could pop up at any point in time because they have the power to.
Well, and that was absolutely like a jaw drop moment for me, was like when it was like, oh no, like, because I really thought that the Diadem Royale was going to lead to like the pilots there that were basically representing other factions were going to be kind of like bigger characters. And it really just felt like the table got like upended.
Before the mission started, I knew probably Hyacinth was showing up there. And so
sometimes I can see you like titter with anticipation in the opening, like 30 minutes of an episode where I'm like, something is like about to drop. I just like don't really know what it is yet.
Sometimes it, and then there's other times where it's like a joy. I think about, if we're talking about favorite moments, for me it was going back to Blossom Canyon. You throw, Pete, you have this red comet roll where you introduce yourself dramatically and make a dramatic action, and it's a failure. And that's another scene where it's like, I knew in my head, like on my list of possibilities, one of my favorite rules in all of Beam Saber is like, rivals can make a move at any time. They can show up whenever. And so like that Blossom Canyon arc, I didn't know 100% that like Hyacinth was going to show up there. But then you rolled that failure trying to stop the train after this big kind of dramatic buildup. And it was such like a perfect like silver platter moment of like, oh, what's the worst thing that can happen here? And it felt instantaneous to me, like it's Hyacinth again, right there, right now.
I also like in that moment too, where Dez takes like a pot shot at his back and like sort of destroys part of the like his what's his mech called? The weight of ascension.
The weight of ascension.
He sort of destroys a little part of it. That was also that felt so good because I was like, I'm going to shoot. It's probably not even going to do anything, right? And then it like sort of chipped away at his arm, and I was like, holy shit! Oh my god, this guy has faults too. He is defeatable, which like didn't feel possible before, and all of a sudden it did. So like as a player, that felt really good.
I liked it as you're like in the same cohort. It smacks of like the Han Solo in The Empire Strikes Back like scene where like they're in Cloud City and everything's going hunky dory with Lando Calrissian. And the doors bust open. It's Darth Vader, and Han Solo like immediately shoots him, which is like. It's like, hell yeah, dude. Like, fuck that guy.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I thought that was cool too, because it was just like, I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm just going to take the shot. Like, and,
right. Separated from the lore that Rhodes had already built up in his mind, we get to see someone go like, no, I'm not just going to let that happen. This isn't my...
Well, and for me, like, every time that Hyacinth shows up in this season, there were many times where I was like nervous, right? Like as a player, because I was worried that something would happen that would like hurt Desmond or Carta or something. And like, I think that is a part of the weight that comes with like the mechanics in Forge in the Dark games, was that like that rival being able to make a move at any time adds like this level of like the dice roll where it's like, maybe I really should push, because the consequence here could like hurt others, not just like me. And that was something that I think this season felt way scarier because of the addition of like frames and armors.
Do you want to know what some of my favorite moments from this season were?
Absolutely. No, I think we're actually going to move on. Good. But thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead. What's your favorite part?
I mean, all my favorite parts are just really small little bits, and then like one big one. But I think that like some of my favorite lines was one that I said in the very last episode of the regular season, where I'm wheeling Carta around and I'm going, cut tissue becomes scars and bones knit themselves together stronger than before. This was just like lines that came off the top of the head, and it had no idea what was coming at the end of that episode. And so it became extra pointed after that. When I had 2 called 6s, 2 sessions in a row,
pretty good.
Some of the greatest feelings ever, even though it was like low stakes, like single die rolls. Doing 2 called 6s in a row was cool. I think that like one of my favorite things was getting to explore the city and go to places and make it feel like a really lived in place. And hey, Coronatus is kind of like the third character in
Yeah.
Risky Standard Season 1.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always say this is like when people ask, like, well, who does Mitch play? And I'm like, Mitch plays everything. Mitch is the backdrop and every other character and
Mitch
the
is
narrator.
the weather.
And yeah, like in so many, it's just the sights, sounds, and smells. And, like, and I don't think that I get like enough of an opportunity. So I'm just going to like lay on the gas. But like a lot of this project works because of the ways that I think Mitch is able to kind of like paint, the picture. And having recently taken like a spin in the chair, there's so many challenges to it that I think like I haven't fully appreciated, like, I guess just like kind of sweating it under the spotlight. But really, I think you kind of like created a place that felt tangible and not just like tangible, like kind of, you could like taste it, like the dust in your mouth, like, and when the ever presence of the storms, like in the background, was just like a thing that I would think about, in the shower or like when I'm walking around on the street, or it was like, yeah, like, like being on the street in Coronatus was like a place that I felt like I've walked around in. You're blushing now. I didn't mean to make you cry though.
No, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, this is just, maybe the kind of like it's hard not to be self-critical. There's a part of me that's like, I wish I had 20 more episodes of just like getting, I feel like I only got to sketch a rough outline of like the things in Coronatus that I wanted to spend, there was so much more time in. And, often our narrative took us, in and out of the city in a way that, I'm hoping or hopeful, season 3 will let us see a little bit more of Coronatus, even if it's Coronatus, from a
in
kind
occupation,
of different historical position. Yeah.
Well, let's like zoom in there a little. Like, what do you? Is there anything from Coronatus that you wish you got to like kind of sink your teeth into a little more, or like any areas or NPCs?
I feel like we got like a little bit of a cursory glance at some of the different districts and neighborhoods, but I feel like we didn't get as much of an insight into what does like an average person in Coronatus like do or feel.
Yeah.
We didn't deal with that many people who were like truly unaffiliated. That's something I would have loved to spend a little bit more time with. Just and this is like stuff that's like we did 40 something episodes for this season, which is so much. That's like 70 hours of audio, and that's like post edit, right? After we've cut out quite a bit. And so it's always going to feel like there's like something you left on the table. But yeah, I think, the citizenry, and just kind of like maybe a little bit more of like, the patter of life is like a thing that I wish.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's also hard sometimes in, in the medium that we are in, compared to a visual medium where, in a visual medium, you can convey a lot in a frame that you don't have to emphasize or highlight. Whereas, every single thing that we show the listener is a sentence one of us has to say. And there's just a limited amount of those that we get to put on the show. I would say it's still a goal going forward to try and imbue the place with this kind of lived-in feeling, and I'm very excited. We are a long ways out from really talking about season 3 or planning it, but just from where we're at right now, I do suspect we might see some more of, or not some more of, we might see some of, in general, Sedge, which is the Rings sort of primary settlement on Imber in the basin. I think kind of contrasting what does life look like in a ring settlement on Imber versus in Coronatus is like something I'm really excited to show, to try and kind of contrast, try and kind of imbue a sense of like what is daily living for the ring and that place versus the people of Coronatus. But
well, and to be fair, I'm pretty sure Star Wars took like 40 years to show the inside of like a normal person's house in Andor. Like I think that's the only time there's like just a pedestrian view of like.
They showed the inside of Anakin Skywalker's house in episode
but it's
1.
Anakin Skywalker. It's like it's like he's like kind of the titular figure. Yeah. So but like I think that's like a goal. We continue to kind of hone that muscle. And once we've got, the Patreon launch, what we're excited to release are sentence packs, and they're going to be kind of like a micro transaction for a descriptive sentence, kind of randomized. So you might get some of the same, you might get a rare holographic one, which could be cool.
Well, I also think that in saying this, if this is not giving away too much, and if it is, you boys, let me know if we should cut it. Just like a little bit of what we're doing with season 2 is maybe giving slightly shorter chunks of visions that like will allow us not to have to build such a big world that leaves some of those pockets unanswered, that we are focusing on this for a shorter amount of time. We can get specifically to the things that bring that pocket of the world together.
Okay, we get it. You guys don't want to do mech stuff. The negotiating is not going to work. It's going to be long. It's going to be even longer.
Yeah.
Nice try.
That's a good point. Like season 2, the vision, and God knows what this is going to look like when we start playing. The vision is a game that's going to be a little bit more episodic, is going to be a little bit more, to use like a monster of the week is not exactly an accurate description, but the sense of, each little adventure is going to be a little bit more self-contained, traveling to different locations. And it's a chance to kind of, hopefully, from my perspective, this is like always a learning process, is like honing the tools, right? I think we've learned so much from producing season 1
for real.
Going into season 2 is a very different kind of thing. And actually that's something I wanted to ask you guys. I was kind of, this was our first season doing anything like this. None of us really have exactly the background for what this is, although I don't know what that background would be, I guess. We didn't go to actual play school.
Tim has the theater degree.
I went close, maybe.
Three of us.
I mean, I have a writing degree that's like,
I was going to say, Mitch also... No, actually, Mitch has the most applicable one, and he's the best at it, too, so...
I also work at a grocery store, right? We're not... in the entertainment industry, as it were. But just so, this is our first season producing the show. It's our first season, like, creating characters for a show. I know there's, like, a ton I've learned from this season, but I was curious if there is anything that you guys have taken from your experience making season 1 that you are kind of taking forward with you as we start creating our characters and kind of planning for season 2.
That's a really good question.
Going into season 2, my character is going to be less fleshed out.
What we talked about, and this is important, like context, I think, was we've played a lot of games together, and I think the three of us, because Mitch is normally the DM, tend to kind of play similar tropes. And I know that we kind of like talked about this preseason, was we made like a decision to try and get out of our comfort zone a little bit. Like I certainly did, because I felt like I'd played a lot of the same beats, so I tried to do something different. And I think like we tried to push a little, and what was really interesting to me was like what came back up that really worked was not the stuff that we had like pre-baked, right? Like, and I think to your point, Malcolm, right? Like, I learned too, like, I think that like fleshing those ideas out sometimes like it's too much in the beginning where it builds naturally off of like a sketch. Is that what you're kind of saying?
With Desmond, like his motives, his drive, what the things that I had planned for him were so strong and laid out that it felt hard to deviate from that whatsoever. And like that is built into Beam Saber a little bit, but it's been really hard for me to like break that mold of like, it's like every role-playing game character, he's a surly,
we can't be character, all like
dark
loners.
character, loner from with a troubled past or whatever. So I'm looking forward to like moving away from that and having a character that is more open-minded and ready to look at things a little bit differently.
I think like a learning for me was like the part I gravitate in my own style, I guess, to writing, right? Like I end up kind of writing a lot that either we use, maybe we don't use, we sketch, and my impulse is to like generate new ideas. And I like kind of, I think what you're saying is like I actually struggle a little bit in like sticking with it or fleshing it out, because I'm like, oh, this idea is cool, or this idea is cool. And I think like one thing with that is, following the lead a little more. Like I really kind of went into this thinking of Rhodes as sort of an ecologist, and that really dissipated like in a different way. But yeah, I mean, I think like giving the story like room to breathe without kind of having like this big. We all came into it with like pretty heavy drives, right? Like of like a thing, an axe to grind, or like a box to check, or like a goal of having some kind of like final conclusion to draw. And I think the story benefited way more from like the acceptance that things don't work out that way, right? Like, and I think that kind of added to the richness of the fiction a bit.
We touched upon this earlier with like both me and Malcolm's character is having a revenge element to it. And I think that as I think back on the season, having a revenge thing is great and can be a very powerful character arc. It also sometimes keeps you locked in the past versus having a character who has ideas of what can happen going forward, besides, again, answering something from the past. So, like, in this next season, I'm excited to maybe just have something that is a character who is excited about what is out there, than someone who is answering to things that have happened and having to recall to a past that no one has seen besides what I have told them.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't,
wow.
I can talk about what brought me to this point, and it can be a fun story and it can inform a lot about my character, but it doesn't have to be 25 years of backstory and moment to moment that has brought me to this moment, which is the only thing that keeps me going forward. Now, this is a character who'd had some things happen, and now, because of that, the future and what is here is what is great.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, I am not linking myself back to answers I feel need to be answered from something that no one has heard yet, or like that I don't even quite know how that feels yet. And I, again, and maybe that's just a little difference of the game that we're playing with Wild Sea Season 2, but like, I know that at least with a character I'm hoping to play, that it can be something that each session is just something more to see.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good takeaway. As part of that is like the show not tell thing, which is probably a little bit of learning for all of us, like expository dialogue. And part of this is that like we've like kind of, again, like dotted line sort of lived in this setting for like going on 2 years and change. So like, I think that thing, you can tie yourself in knots trying to make it all work. And like at the end of the day, we're kind of like creating an original story in an original setting. So like, I think at a point I kind of gave up on trying to like make this kind of pressure of like canon or something being consistent, and like gave a little more flex.
I want to just point it out because it's a thing that I notice a lot, and I think it speaks also probably to like Peter and I's slightly differing kind of approaches to storytelling, which is that I think probably over the course of the season, about once a week, Pete, you have asked me a question about the setting, and my response is almost invariably like, I don't know, or like not yet. Like I think you asked me, what's the name of like the Ring's homeworld, and it's like, great question.
Never thought about it. Yeah,
and this is maybe to a flaw at times. I very rarely write for anything that is not going to show up on screen.
Well, this is like the same way I read, which is like, oh, what about this thing? Or like, what is that like thing about? And those are like the threads that I tug on. And I think like I'm still learning that. And I mean, so yeah, if you ever needed confirmation, I'm also the group's de facto most annoying contributor, I think.
No. I mean, often the questions are insightful for me because then they make me think about like an aspect of the setting I haven't gotten to yet. But I think I have this desire to keep things, and partially this is, I think, due to the medium. I like to let things stay fluid until they need to be crystallized, because so much could change based on like what I want to do with the story or where we might be going, that I don't want to. The thing I don't ever really want to run into that often is this moment of like, I want to do X, Y, and Z, or I want to go to X, Y, and Z. And then it's like, I'm sorry, unfortunately, the canon says that like only the people who've passed the secret test are allowed into the city of Za or whatever, you know?
So interesting. Do you care to comment on the hot dog man in season 1, episode 2 and 3?
That's Chert Slane.
What was his name again?
Chert Slane.
God,
I was really. He really needs to come back as like
the Pennyroyal Armitage hot dog vendor.
I was talking about him being a sort of Mike Armentrout from Breaking Bad kind of character.
Oh, for sure.
3.
That's
The thought in my mind was more of like a Tom Bombadil, where we're gonna have him in like one episode where it's like, that's weird. Okay, like
a Slugworth style character.
Having just said that I don't write a bunch of extra stuff, I do have a surprisingly large amount of notes on who Chert Slane is and what his whole deal is.
I mean, I was thinking about when you were saying that too, like I think when we introduced the Drovers right after the is it Watchtower Echo? Or was that kind of went off into the desert to like this kind of drover caravan. I like sat down probably in like an hour and banged out like a ton of stuff about drovers and these like 3 characters like Cygnus Strand, Sojourn Vale, and Chiton Paul. And I was like, man, these are the characters. Like I could do a whole season on these guys. Like these guys are cool. Like I want them to be NPCs. Like I want to be this guy. And we, I think I was glad that like Cygnus Strand played like a role, but I feel like I barely just like kind of scratched the surface.
Oh yeah, I actually really like that arc a lot. I would love to spend more time with those characters.
But yeah, that's the funny part of this is like some of the stuff that you think is like really going to be like impactful ends up being more like background color, and the stuff that I sometimes don't think is going to be so front and center like really ends up being like big connective tissue.
What else do we have for questions? What else we want to touch on?
Oh, I have one. We've talked about like, obviously throughout the universe, what the Concordat is and how it comes from planet to planet, taking things over, searching for the builder, how the Commonwealth also spreads from planet to planet. The Ring has also done this. And like, at what points do we feel in this season or in how the Ring expands that they at any point could be looked at as like maybe not the good guys, heroes that we think of them as having played with them as a season? Like
when does the Ring take the heel turn and like
or what does that look like? I guess like I want to see maybe what the other side of that coin is, because we definitely had like it as this is the fighting good.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'll cop to that. Like, I think I tried pressing on that half a dozen times in the season, like, because I think that, to that question, like in some way, I think Rhodes felt like kind of the, like, get in the Eva, Shinji, like, you're the only person who could do it. It's like, in a weird way, it felt like a ball and chain at times, where it was like, I don't think Rhodes like wanted to keep fighting. And so like in some way, I think sort of was not like a bad guy. Like I think he still believed in the cause, but it was like in a kind of twist your arm behind your back. Like you have to do it. You have to keep fighting sort of thing, where, they were sort of gray for me more than like black or white.
I've got like a big answer to this, which will be my dissertation. So if anyone else wants to like hit it first before I kind of like, I drop in, I'm happy to like.
Yeah, I think that, I think there was a very clear moment in like the beginning where like I tried to like throw a smoke sleep grenade at that guy and then like had to kill him. I think that was also like a moment for Des where he was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a fucking killer now. Or like my path on revenge to kill these other guys, I'm probably going to have to kill some other people too. That, do I feel that bad? This guy was like sort of like a fascist cop ultimately within the fiction. Still felt weird and bad about it, but like it just became easier at a certain point.
And like in a weird way, like
not like I'm thinking about it. There's nothing I could say that Mitch would not put in a better way because he's smarter than me. So
well, I mean, like I'm gonna
let Mitch to say what he needs to say.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear your perspective too.
Well, first I'm going to read. This is not a question, but Mongoose again hit us with this one, which cheered me up a lot. Mongoose says, "Not really a question, but you guys did a fantastic job of threading in a well thought out and lived in leftist worldview with realistic struggles." They say, "I often struggle to find fantasy that doesn't beat you over the head with it." Parentheses, sometimes that's a good thing. And so this speaks kind of like, Pete, we have a kind of a shared questions doc we've been working off of here. Pete, you kind of wrote a question in here as well, talking about the threads of this season as like tugging on revolutionary struggle under occupation, the challenges that come with, as you said, phrase it here, pursuit of a perfect idea in an imperfect world. And I think like, mask off, this is an ideologically leftist program, right? Or at least like, from my perspective, it is.
Mm-hmm. I think we're all aligned on that.
I am happy to say I am an anarchist and a socialist, right? I'm a communist. These are like my politics. And they come into the show with me, and I think it would be a disservice to like act like that's not the case. And so like a thing for me is like two of the biggest inspirations for this season, out some of the other things we discussed, are Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed, which is a science fiction novel about an anarchist commune on a moon orbiting a sort of imperialist capitalist planet. And it's like a pretty grounded description of what kind of like communalist, anarchist, like social practices would look like put into practice. And the other big influence for me is like Ian M. Banks's The Culture series, which is also about a kind of far-flung, futuristic, like a society that has achieved like fully egalitarian, like luxury communism. They have abolished labor completely.
You said it was fully automated gay luxury space communism.
Yeah. Yes, it like is
that is
explicitly.
True.
Yeah. Like,
I would go further than gay. It's like something else.
Yeah. They are hedonists, and it's like hedonism as a like framed as an unapologetically kind of good thing. And so the thing that both of those inspirations do for me that I think are really good is that they never try and pull the rug on you about the societies they depict being like actually bad, right? Like the Culture series never tells you like, actually it's bad that these people don't have to like work and starve. And The Dispossessed says that like, like this society is not one without social problems, right? But it has different social problems than the ones that crop up under capitalism. And so like for me, what that meant going into this season was really thinking about, when are the Ring the bad guys? For me, probably not ever, or at least not in like such an easy way to answer, right? I'm not interested in like tearing apart like the leftist revolutionary movement, but I am interested in sketching out the places where it gets complicated, where it runs into questions of, if the revolution is endless, at what point does spreading it, become a kind of imperialism, or does it become a kind of imperialism? Like those are interesting questions to me, but like,
yeah, that's really interesting.
For me, from like a philosophical grounding, like the thing that the Ring wants for the people who live within it is better than the thing that the Concordat wants and the Commonwealth wants. And that's like, I'm comfortable with that being kind of a truth of the setting for me, to some extent. And given time, maybe that thing transmutes into something uglier, but I'm more interested in sketching out the places where that friction happens without ever poisoning the well. There's so many things in media already that are like, oh, these revolutionaries are so good, but like actually it turns out at the end they want to blow up schools, or this
is the classic Marvel movie third act, which is like, damn it, I agree with your beliefs, but I don't agree with your inexplicable act of violence, which makes like socialism look bad. Like that's. We talked about that at some point, and I think that really resonated with me too, where it was like, I am so burnt out on the kind of idea that like the things that are good in this world have like an inherent flaw. But, I think, like we talked about earlier, part of this is sort of like, what does it actually look like, right? Like it doesn't mean it's free of struggle or free of like...
It's not free of struggle. People are always going to have, either interpersonal, but like, what does that struggle mean, and how is that redefined within a system where so many of these other things are met, right? Like the conflicts that sometimes arise from that are very different and are not conflicts that wipe everything good that everything else that had accomplished off the table,
Like a dark current in this setting that like I always kind of flirt with in my mind has been like, the only thing that like makes the apparatus not a figurehead is that they don't call it a god, or they don't call it like a god machine. And like it is, but I think part of that is like, we've seen it be fallible. We've seen it be wrong. Like we've seen it be open to interpretation as this kind of like enigmatic, unknowable, calculating, logistic engine. And like it produces I always think of it, I guess, as like producing the conditions for the Ring rather than really giving the marching orders. Yeah. And like that is like one of these things that I think illustrates your point, right? Which is like, I don't want that to be having an ulterior motive. I want it to bring this like magic that like creates a blank canvas where these ideas of revolutionary struggle can like take place. I think like to add one other thing on that, and then I'm going to stop talking. To me, and I think this is probably some rehashed version of something you've said before, Mitch, too, is like, to me, like the definition and the appeal of speculative fiction is to be able to provide like a petri dish to play with these ideas where you can control the variables, but also like explore some of those edges in a way that like, this is the only time in my entire life, and I think this is important in like the current moment in TTRPG stuff too, is like one of the things I really liked about this season was like exploring the idea of like, there's no money here and not everything is like a for sale, right? And like, that's also what draws us to, I think, these Forged in the Dark games and like the itch.io community. And a lot of this is like, they are outside of the kind of like D&D microtransaction, like matrix, which I think lays this like foundation for, you can really upend these ideas that are conventional in like economic exchange in these games, right? Like pay XP to get a thing or whatever. Like they operate differently, and you I guess the cost is more in like risk or creativity, and the reward is more in fiction. Like those are the kind of things that I think like really brought me back to like the ideological core of what we were trying to explore a little bit.
Yeah, I would say, I think, too, like thinking about going forward with this game is like a thing I'm interested in seeing at some point is, it was kind of a decision to set this season in Coronatus outside of like a place that the ring is in power in. One that I think is like a little easier to get grounded in like a place that was more similar to our own reality in terms of like commerce and kind of relationships than it was to like start in this kind of like explicitly collectivist, anti-materialist kind of community. But I think now that we have kind of established the baseline, I think is fun, is like getting to go to places where the ring is stronger and getting to imagine kind of like what could be, right? What could a place look like where money and material concerns are not the primary motivators.
Yeah, and like in a weird way, I feel like the hardest part is over because there's so many like kind of these ideas and like threads to tug on that are really like we set up a lot, and I'm excited to kind of like continue pushing on them.
And I think it's also worth saying like season 2 is, I think, probably less explicitly political than season 1 was. Saying that now, who fucking knows? Maybe the first season or the first episode ends up being.
Yeah, we're going to become revolutionary.
Sure. Write that down. Right now. When we all say, none of us are going to try to like push for like a political or philosophical goal.
I can't tell you where to place your money on the betting websites, but
but I can guarantee you already, right, that season 2 is still going to be interested in societies and about how people cooperate together, how people build together, and the kinds of relationships that people build and what those, because that's like the shit that I'm interested in. I think it's the stuff that we're broadly all interested in.
Not to give too much away, but we'll have some more, I think, kind of like elucidating updates and early kind of road to season 2 stuff coming up soon. I think we're going to continue to build on this like larger idea, but in like a very different way, which is something I'm excited about. Like a different scale, a different, I think, like flavor and tone. But stay tuned, dear listener, and see if you can spot any of our propaganda woven into the web of Wildsea. I do kind of want to zoom in a little bit and talk about, the finale and like the setup into season 3 before we wrap up the episode for today. Does anybody have anything before we kind of jump into that?
I mean, maybe we should hit this last question from Mongoose, which is just a lighter one before we kind of talk about the ending of season 1 and then what we've got coming next. Which is just, if you could change one mechanic in either Forged in the Dark games or Beam Saber specifically, what would it be?
No quirks. I don't understand them.
I kind of like the quirks.
Go back to the fuel meter. This quirk shit. I'm not rocking with it.
Austin, if you're listening,
I don't know what it means.
We love
Austin,
you.
if you're listening, love you. You're great. Thank you for the game. I don't fucking get it. Mitch, you've explained it to me so many times. I'm like, yeah. Oh, okay. I get it now.
Oh, I do not have my cool thing anymore.
Well, it's also the thing that makes you special. Like, actually, excuse me one second.
Pete's been chugging tequila. That's why
I'm hitting the bong really quick.
I'm looking forward to season 3. Obviously, if you listen to the finale, once again, if you haven't listened to the finale, go back and listen to it.
Crazy if you got this far.
Great. Why are you listening? What do you even have to like?
This is the first episode you started on. Terrible.
Are you betting?
If this is your first episode, we love you. Welcome, Risk Taker. Enjoy the archives.
I trashed the Mercuria because I felt like I kind of knew, I read the tea leaves. I saw what was coming, and I felt like it was also, I was in a desperate position. I made a risky maneuver, and I trashed it. And I think that the next machine that comes along, where it'll come from and what it'll be, I don't know. But I think that I'm going to go into it with a much more solid idea now that I'm like a mech guy.
Oh, confirmed.
I'm with you. Okay, as another not mech dude, I will agree with you. I do feel like for the game that we were playing, spent a little less time in mechs than we thought we would.
Yeah, I'll admit that.
I think that having played this season, knowing how we use them and where they came into play, I could go into the next season, whether it's with the semaphore or with a different character, a different, frame, with the idea that it is more in play every session.
Yeah.
I think that also is us playing one season and learning how the game works. And now we go like, oh, we spent a lot of time like doing X, trying to prep ourselves for a mission instead of just being like, use our sick, very tight giant mechs to start just making something happen.
To add a counterpoint, like I actually really like the flexibility, and I think it adds a lot of like verticality to the game to be able to go from like human size to like, okay, now we're like in these big things, or it's like when we would prepare ahead of time and like they're hidden under tarps, buried under the sand or something. Like there's a really sick scene in like Gundam Wing where like they just like the mechs have been shipped and waiting, like they're on like a I don't even remember.
I did love the thread and needle for that.
The train was cool.
That brought us all around. It was cool.
I think all this so far, like I feel like there's a lot of things that like we maybe could have played Beam Saber differently. One of the things that I really like in Beam Saber is having this is any Forged in the Dark game, but specifically in Beam Saber, your stress meter being like you can take stress to kind of push or improve your odds. But resulting in a scar, if you max out your stress, you end up with a scar. But I actually feel like if I could change one thing about this, like I don't know mechanically how to do it, but maybe that's like not a scar, but like there were these a way to like codify some of these like themes that came up. Like my stress meter never like filled, but there were like a couple of like really thematic like beats. Where it's like, well, that's like something that's going to color that character for the rest of that character's life, right? Like of not even like having to kind of stress out to get there, but Hyacinth being inevitable, I think was like something that really changed Rhodes as a character. Like maybe there's something in there that would like change it, but I almost wish that like the stress was less forgiving and the scar mechanic was like more rigid, because I think it's something that really pushes players to evolve their characters in the same way that like drive clocks do. That'd be like my one, but because otherwise, like I really enjoy the system. I think like the flexibility and like range of the kind of stories you can tell with the base system, and there's 2 expansions that I don't even think we touched this whole season that I would love to dive into. And maybe in season 3, we just might.
I think I probably have a very different perspective also having, GM'd Beam Saber this whole season. Right. I think I'm thinking about the system in slightly different ways. I'd say if there's like one, I'm going to shout out the opposite of this, which is like the master stroke of Beam Saber and like the shit that's just so cool to me. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. The rival mechanic and this idea of like a villain who can show up at any time specifically just to fuck up your day, and like and especially a villain who kind of gets to break the rules of the game a little bit just to mess with you, is so thematically on point and just such a cool thing as a GM to have in your back pocket. So I love Rivals. I think that's one of the coolest things that this whole game does. If I could change one thing, I do think Beam Saber is probably the most mechanically fiddly of all of the Forge in the Dark games that I've played. And, between having your vehicles, having your squad and then having your character. There's a lot more information to keep track of on the sheets. And this is also the kind of game that we're playing. A different game maybe cares about this a lot more. But the differentiation of supply points into personnel and material.
I kind of forget.
We basically just ignored it, to be honest. Sorry, Austin. But that was probably, and again, a different game might care about that a lot more. It's just not where we were at.
Yeah, we just didn't have money.
Yeah, we didn't have money. And we also, we were not out scavenging, a different kind of story. Like all that stuff matters a little more. But so I think the supply point system is maybe kind of one step fiddlier than I cared for. But I gotta be, I really like Beam Saber a lot. I've said it a billion times.
Oh yeah,
and I'll say it one more. If you haven't bought it, buy it, read it, play it. It's a great game.
Buy it and buy the hardcover because the book is one of the best put together Forged in the Dark games. I think
oh yeah, it's gorgeous.
Not all of those Forged in the Dark games have I loved the short stories in the hardcover, in the text of Beam Saber, because I think they give such a good illustration of how it can work. Yeah. And it's I think it's really well made. Yeah. So again, shout out Austin Ramsey.
Yeah. I would also say, there's an entire kind of augmented reality aspect of the kind of base Beam Saber book.
Yeah.
That just didn't show up in our game because it doesn't really quite fit with the setting that we had already kind of predetermined. And so thinking about how to integrate that stuff more in a future season is something still, on my mind, but that stuff is cool. I just want to shout it out because you might not even realize it's in the game because we did not bring it in that way. I want to shout that out as well. But with all that, I think maybe it's time we kind of...
Yeah.
You want to talk about the finale a little bit, and then we talk a little bit about season 3, and then kind of probably put a pin in this. And
yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of set it up, and I maybe we should have said this earlier on, but one of the kind of things that evolved out of the course of this is Mitch and I had always kind of talked about using multiple games to tell a single story. And when I really ran the tape back, if we include Foray, and actually in some of our preseason stuff, we probably put 4 or 5 different games, which were very different, right? To kind of tell the story. And I think Ben Robbins and I mean all of the it's Ben Robbins, right?
Yeah.
Ben Robbins games, great. I love Microscope. Follow is a really exceptional way. I almost wish that they were in it should be an addendum to the book, because I think Follow is such a good way to take all of this fiddly plot mechanic stuff and wrap it up in a couple of really big broad strokes. And so coming into that, we knew that the dice rolls would be kind of compressed into a couple of key moments, and Follow pushes you to kind of not just speak as your own character, but pick up a side character and own it. And, I think the finale left me, I mean, it was literally the night before my birthday. This is actually sort of funny because it was the finale was heavy, and then in a big way.
You say in the episode, you go it's my birthday.
It was literally my birthday, and it felt like the world was kind of falling down, and it was all this work was failed, and I was so sad. And I got off the call and was damn, maybe we have to redo this whole thing. And I was so bummed out. I was having a birthday party the next day, and I was taking the trash out in the rain. It was terrible weather here, and I opened the front door, and Malcolm was at my front door, had flown from
it was funny
Louisiana.
Recording that the night before, knowing I'm going to surprise your fucking ass the next day.
Yeah, it was very funny.
I'm going to get on a plane, fly all the way to New York to walk to your door in the rain.
And you were
and I know you're having a bad day. And I remember you were what are you doing here? And it was I flew here to ask you what the fuck your problem is.
Yeah, it was nah. And and I think part of that
Malcolm really good at surprising people.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Let me tell you.
But I think obviously that's a real world thing that's off camera, but in a way I'm really glad that the finale ended up how it did, because it was honest. And the good guys don't win every time. And gosh, I mean in the history of leftist struggle throughout the world,
a lot of L's.
A lot of L's for our boys. And I guess in a way at the time it felt very hard to kind of grapple with, because it maybe wasn't most exciting. I think by the time it was coming out, Trump had been elected for a second term.
Yeah.
And we were man, maybe this is not the story that we thought this whole time. But as more time has passed, like I really feel like it's a testament to the kind of like grounded in reality storytelling that we really sought to do. And that includes the kind of contradiction, the like pain, the feeling of like failure. Like, and for me as Rhodes, I really felt like this was like a living nightmare in a way, because it was like after, 250 odd years of this like endless conflict that like Rhodes just wants. There's like an old adage, like boxing coaches always say this, where like, I'd rather be a gardener in a war than I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Right. Like, and I think like that's kind of like where I wanted Rhodes to be. And like, he just cannot get the opportunity to like put the gun down, like, and
Rhodes could just be a yeoman farmer somewhere,
But I think this is also like true of why we were drawn to this like over and over, because these are the kinds of like, again, like speculative fiction, and why it's like so important is because these are like the places where in this like moment where it feels like you are so powerless to the kind of like techno dystopia political hellscape that is just ceaseless. But like here in our kind of fictive universe, you're able to kind of take these brave swings and feel like you're doing something that kind of matters and moves the needle. And I think what makes it feel real is like, it's not just, you can't just like be wishful thinking, right? Like you can't just like hope for a better world. Like sometimes you got to take the fall and like find your way back out of the hole, So for me, it felt very tangible. And like,
do we want to talk really quick about like podcasting and production?
Mitch asked one, right? Like, what do we
touch
like?
on that? I asked us about
okay.
if we had learned anything from season 2.
Yeah.
I forgot to do it again. But shout out,
shout out Liam.
Big shout out to Liam Doherty, who is joining the team as our editor. I have just not internalized saying your name in the intro, Liam, and I apologize. But I'm gonna. It's a big part of my notes going forward. But Liam's joining us. I'm very excited for what that's going to look like going forward. I think Risky Standard is about to sound better than it ever has. I've said it before in the Discord.
Ever thought
I've edited most of this first season. I hope it sounded listenable, but I have zero experience doing any kind of audio editing. I learned everything I did this season as I did it. And, I think it's going to be a real treat to have someone who actually knows what they're doing behind the keyboard editing the show. I think it's going to enable us to do a lot more interesting stuff, working in different kinds of like micro fictions and sound elements. So again, huge shout out to Liam. I think you'll start hearing Liam's work in the feed very soon if you haven't already.
Absolutely. Check out Mixed Success too. It's Liam's other show. We'll throw a link up in the Discord in the show notes too. But yeah, we're very stoked on I think what's coming.
And then go ahead.
It's like looking in a mirror, baby. I was gonna ask you, Mitch, right? Like I think you probably had the most like prep maybe involved, like going into like a finale. Like did it land? Were you prepared for us losing? Like, did you?
So now that we're already here, I think I can say it. Right now that season 1 is past us. Originally, the finale of season 1 was going to be a beam saber mission, and it was going to be a beam. I had not decided yet to go to follow. Like, had occurred to me. I had kind of decided not to, and then had come back to it. And I think it's a conversation with you, Pete, that actually like kind of maybe rethink follow again, but. Initially, the way season 1 was going to end was kind of a pretty similar the way that we end that last downtime session. And then, I'll say it, you can kind of hear it probably, because we do like some healing that episode. Up until the end of that episode, I still was planning that season, or the season finale was going to be a beam saber mission about getting out of the city, kind of presuming that the Concordat it was going to win, right? That like there was no hope of winning, and the only option was to escape. And it was the mission itself was going to be just about getting people out of there safely. And then it kind of felt like, well, actually, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't make that decision. Maybe I should.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So your plan was like kind of always have us on the back foot.
Yeah, my foot. Yeah, I've always. So my initial conception was that like the Concordat takes Coronadus, and then I actually kind of, and fool that I am, I was like, actually, you know what? Maybe there's something interesting about like if they do win. You know what I mean? I wanted to have that possibility of hope, and so that was one of the things that led me to like say, like, actually, let's play this game. Let's play it out. Let's see what happens. You know, because I the joy in finding out is always so much more exciting for me than like the pre-writing, and so I made that pivot. I called it. We talked about it. We decided we had played Follow before, and then boom. It actually still somehow came as more of a shock to me then than it was having planned for it, because then it was like, okay, it's happening.
Yeah, and like I'm that's the first time I'm hearing that. I'm genuinely kind of surprised actually, because I thought that this season was probably going to end with some kind of like crescendo fight between Rhodes and Hyacinth, and probably putting that to bed. But that's interesting. And like one thing that I think we cut from, and we can cut this out of the episode if we don't want to include it, but one thing I don't think made it into the final cut that I sometimes think about including was like, for me anyway, those two finale episodes like feel more emotional for me, like on the microphone, than I'm like normally comfortable with. And like one thing that I liked was I think we were all kind of at a moment like sort of panicked because it wasn't going right. And like Malcolm, you had like, I think a moment where you were like, no, like my idea is bad. Like this isn't like, just forget it. Like just forget it and move on. And as a group, we were like, no, like, like let's figure it out. Like, let's like push through it because your ideas are in the right place. And it was just like, it was this moment where I think we had to kind of decide like, how do we kind of take this imperfect outcome and push it like kind of in service of this bigger idea. And I think as a storyteller and as a player, it was like an interesting moment to kind of decide how to handle that, and like a big learning for me is I think being honest to that part of the story more than just like what we want to see is like kind of letting, the fates decide in a funny way.
We also get out of that moment of Desmond kind of reaching out to Thea's hand and flashing back to Salvation's hand on the ground as a child, which is one of my favorite images in the whole season.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think we got enough time to really like ship Desmond and was it Seldom? We were kind of saying they had like, or no, it was Carta and Seldom,
or Carta and Seldom. Yeah, I think that like also that was something I wanted to hit too. That was like sort of maybe came to me a couple times throughout the season, but then like became really solid where like I sent like a Discord message to Mitch where like, no, we need to ship a like Gates Desmond romance that is in the fires of war, these fiery passions like sort of come to the surface, and then I'm looking forward to exploring that in the next.
I had the pleasure of being flirty and giving you a little peck on the cheek.
Which I guess kind of points to the it comes back around here, right? Is like season 3. Worth stating now. We've said this a couple times in different places, but the idea right now is we're gonna play a season of Wildsea. I think, dear listener, you can expect, and even as I'm saying it, I know that who we are and what we are means that this might not be true. But we're gonna try and shoot that. I think Wildsea is gonna be a little bit of a shorter season than this first season was. A little bit tighter, a little bit more episodic, a little easier to jump in and out of. And then season 3, we will return to Imber. We will come back to the Black Star constellation and the Ring and, a Coronatus under Concordat rule. And I'm not going to try, that's probably more than a year away from where we are at in this moment in time. So I'm not going to try and guess too much at what you're going to see. Except I will say, ending season 1, unfortunately, it gave me so many ideas for season 3. Like it was like, right as we were like, all right, let's put a pin in it, I suddenly felt a like profusion of just new ideas for this setting. So I would say I'm excited to get back in the seat. But
well, if we can like boil it down like into maybe a sentence or two each, like how do you feel like Desmond, Carta, Rhodes, like coming into that? Like, do you have any like an idea?
Oh, that's all secret. That's all.
Okay.
That's trade secret.
Keep that in wraps. Keep it in wraps.
What I will say is I think you will probably get a small time jump forward. And then we will kind of come in had the situation will have blossomed into itself a little bit more, and that is where I think the camera will pick us up in season 3. Past that, I've got some notes, I've got some big picture ideas, but there's so much about it that I don't know it all yet, and I'm so excited to find that story with you guys.
I mean, me too, and we hope you are too. I think it's been such a big year for this. It feels really special to be able to share it out. And I think this is probably as good a time as any to say it, but we're immensely grateful to be able to like share, this kind of like fictive world that we've cooked up together. And, like we don't know, right? Like, and there's been so many times throughout this season where we've like kind of looked to the community to come up with a name for something or suggest an idea. And like part of this I think is fun is like being able to tell it all together. And we're really excited about seasons 2 and beyond. And we hope you are too.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Tune in next time on Risky Standard.
Take it sleazy, risk takers.